On the very first day after crossing over, I was drained dry by Su Qianyue, the sect master of the Hahuan sect. My name is Lin. I was originally an engineer from Blue Star. After one sleep, I woke up having transmigrated to the Tianxin continent and had even awakened the legendary pure yang sacred body. This physique is hailed as an exceedingly rare dual-cultivation sacred body. Its yang energy is so abundant it reaches the extreme. Not only is its dual-cultivation efficiency far beyond that of ordinary people, it can also repel all evil and enhance a cultivation partner's talent. I had just finished daydreaming about a good life of immortality cultivation, eternal life, and being surrounded by beauties when I turned around and was caught red-handed by Su Qianyue, the sect master of the Hahuan sect. She casually tossed me a copy of the Yin-Yang Hahuan art and directly locked me in a secret chamber. For a full 7 days and 7 nights, I never even got a clear look at which way the sect's main gate opened. I only felt the yang energy throughout my body pouring out uncontrollably like floodwaters after a dam was opened. In the secret chamber, candlelight flickered. The bed never stopped shaking. By the end of the 7th day, I had grown so thin I was skin and bones, my vision unfocused, without even the strength to lift a hand. Su Qianyue leaned by my ear, her voice so soft it seemed to drip with tenderness, saying that a great calamity was about to befall the sect and thanking me for sacrificing myself to help her break through. She also said I was her first and only man, and that she would never forget this favor for all eternity. But after saying that, she took my withered hand and pressed it against her chest, then turned around, got dressed, and left. Her steps were crisp and decisive, and she didn't even look back once. I lowered my head and looked at my shriveled body, and all that remained in my heart was self-mockery. So this transmigrator's fate was to start out as a human cauldron? Before I could even step out of the newbie village, I was already about to get killed off? My consciousness grew blurrier and blurrier, and like a dead leaf swept up by the wind, I plunged straight toward the dark abyss. The exhilarating life I had once imagined burst like bubbles at the slightest touch. Just when I thought I was completely done for, a crisp mechanical voice suddenly exploded in my head. Ding! Detected that the host's life is in critical danger. The system is activating emergency transfer mode. Dual cultivation to godhood system loaded successfully. Target plane locked. Eldrin continent. My eyes flew wide open, and I nearly sat bolt upright from my deathbed. A system. I knew a transmigrator couldn't possibly be without a cheat. I stared fixedly at Su Qianyue's devastatingly beautiful face, carving her appearance into my very bones, and said hoarsely, word by word, Su, sooner or later, I'm coming back to settle this score with you. The next second, endless darkness swallowed all my senses. My consciousness sank, and I blacked out completely. When I opened my eyes again, above me was the tattered canopy of a carriage, with dim gray light seeping through the cracks in the rough wooden boards. The wheels rolled over the gravel road, clattering and jolting so hard that my temples throbbed. Sitting opposite me was an old man in a coarse cloth robe, looking at me with a worried face and muttering in a language I couldn't understand at all. Before I could react, a sudden sharp pain struck my head, and the original host's memories came flooding in like a torrent. This body was also called Lin Winston, the illegitimate son of Baron Winston of the Griffin Empire. His mother died in childbirth when giving birth to him. He grew up on the estate, nominally a young master, but in reality, even the butler could bully him at will. 3 months ago, 3 successive lords of Frostfall territory under the Baron's name died one after another. That place lies in the northern frontier, where the undead have run rampant for 20 years. It is a universally acknowledged land of death, and no one dared go there to take office. Only then did the Baron remember this son of his, and with a grand flourish of his pen sent him north. Put nicely, it was to inherit the family estate. Bluntly put, it was sending him out to die. The original host was both frightened and exhausted, and after days of travel, he died directly in the carriage last night, which was exactly how I came to take over his body. I pulled out a palm-sized bronze mirror from my clothes and took a look. Sharp brows, bright eyes, and well-defined features. It was exactly the same face I had in my previous life. Before I could take a closer look, the system prompt sounded again. Ding! The original host's body has suffered from long-term malnutrition, extreme shock, and multiple organ failure, and cannot carry the host's soul. The system has fully repaired and transferred the host's pure yang origin here. The current body is completely identical to the host's original body, with all data fully retained. As soon as it finished speaking, the weak, heavy feeling throughout my body vanished instantly, and that familiar sense of strength returned to every limb and bone. I let out a sigh of relief. My own body is still the easiest to use. This system really is reliable. Young master, are you all right? Old Steward Barlow grew more anxious when he saw I hadn't made a sound for so long. I rubbed my throbbing temples and asked for water in a hoarse voice. After gulping down 2 mouthfuls of icy water, my mind cleared completely, and I summoned the system panel. A pale blue translucent light screen floated before my eyes, the information clear at a glance. Name: Lin Winstor Constitution. Pure Yang Holy Body SSS Rank Cultivation, None. Cultivation Method: Yin Yang Joyous Union Art. Beginner Dao Companion. None. The system's core rules were very clear. Form a Dao companion bond with a qualified woman, and you can gain dual cultivation points to exchange for various immortal cultivation techniques, pills, and resources. The higher the Dao companion's race, talent, and rank, the stronger the benefits brought by dual cultivation. And my Pure Yang Holy Body not only increases dual cultivation efficiency tenfold, but can also feed back to improve a Dao companion's talent, and is a natural counter to all cold evil beings. Simply the perfect nemesis tailor-made for the undead of the northern frontier. I tried looking at Barlow, and his status panel immediately popped up before my eyes. An ordinary old man with little combat ability, but his loyalty was 78. He had suffered a lot following the original host and never left. I casually comforted him a couple of times, leaving the old man looking bewildered and unable to react for quite a while. Just then, a guard shout came from outside the carriage. "Young Master Lin, we're at Outpost City. We need to get down and resupply." I threw open the carriage curtain and jumped down. What came into view was a city wall built of gray-black boulders, its surface covered in marks from blades and axes. The grim, killing aura of the northern frontier hit me head-on. Not far to the east side of the city, a large area enclosed by wooden fences was packed with people, and the commotion could be heard from half a street away. "What's going on over there?" I raised a hand and pointed. Barlow followed my gaze and quickly replied, "Reporting to you, young master, that's the slave market. The northern frontier is chaotic, with many bandits. Slave-catching teams bring people into the city every day. It's filthy and disorderly in there. Let's go take a look." I cut him off and headed that way at once. After reading so many web novels, what kind of place is the slave market in the beginner village? It's a gold mine for transmigrators to pick up bargains. I had just arrived in this world with nothing to my name, so it was the perfect chance to see if I could find any talent that met the system's standards. The moment I stepped through the fenced gate, a foul stench mixed with sweat, rust, and a faint scent of blood hit me in the face. Rusty iron cages stood one after another, each crammed with several people, all sallow and emaciated, their eyes numb. Several young female slaves were barely clothed, drawing whistles and pointing from passing mercenaries, and the stream of filthy language never ceased. I silently activated the scan in my mind, and the pale blue light screen spread across my field of vision. My gaze swept over cage after cage, and status panels flashed by rapidly. Human, no talent, seriously ill. Beastkin, no talent, disabled. After checking dozens in a row, let alone someone who met the standards for a Dao companion, even buying one as a laborer seemed pointless. They probably wouldn't live long. Just as I was frowning in disappointment, a middle-aged merchant with a rat-like face squeezed over, rubbing his hands with a broad smile plastered on his face. "You look unfamiliar, young master. First time in Outpost City. What kind are you looking for? Sturdy laborers for rough work, or virgins to warm your bed?" Old Luo only deals in top-quality goods. His beady eyes darted all over me, clearly taking me for some foolish young noble with more money than sense. Seeing my lack of interest, he lowered his voice again and pointed to a separate iron cage not far away. "If Milord is looking for a bit of fun, I'd advise picking a beastkin. Especially that cow beastkin over there. You know the sort of pleasure she offers. Once you're tired of her, you can resell her without taking a loss." I followed his gaze. Inside the cage was a young cow beastkin girl with light brown animal ears and a voluptuous figure. She was indeed eye-catching. But when the system panel popped up, the talent field was completely blank, so she did not meet the Dao companion criteria. I withdrew my gaze and said nothing, continuing deeper into the market. Barlow stayed close behind me, clutching the money pouch tightly with both hands and watching the people around us warily. At the far end of the market, the stench grew even more pungent, and most of the cages were battered and shabby, holding nothing but defective goods that no one could sell. I paused, just about to turn around and leave, when the corner of my eye suddenly caught sight of an inconspicuous little iron cage in the corner. Curled up inside was a small, frail figure, hugging her knees with her face buried between her legs. The skin exposed beneath the rags was covered in a dull layer of scales, and a thin tail hung limply outside the cage. At first glance, she looked like nothing more than a low bloodline lizard beastkin, the sort passers-by could not even be bothered to spare a proper glance. But the system panel before my eyes suddenly burst with a blinding blue light at that very moment. Name: Sylvia. Race: Dragonkin. Bloodline: Incomplete. Talent: Winter's Blessing. S-rank: Purity 100. Status: Weak, Hungry, Terrified. Meets Tao companion criteria. My heart gave a heavy thump. An S-rank talent. Frost Dragon. Bloodline. This was practically a windfall from heaven. I suppressed the excitement in my heart, slowed my steps, and crouched down in front of the iron cage. The person inside sensed the movement and trembled violently, shrinking further into the shadows before slowly raising her head. A delicate little face came into view, with a high nose bridge and a pair of rare ice blue eyes. Ash-white scales spread from her chin all the way to the corners of her forehead. In this world, where pure humanity was considered beautiful, this was the mark of a cursed monster. But to me, this Dragonkin girl's appearance matched my tastes perfectly. Old Luo came over as well. Seeing me staring at this lizard folk, he immediately perked up and began boasting while thumping his chest, saying she was fresh stock, very clean, young and easy to train, and he opened by asking for 1 gold coin. Barlow immediately grew anxious. 1 gold coin? That's daylight robbery. A family of 3 in Outpost City couldn't spend 1 gold coin on black bread in a whole year. Looking like that, no one would want her at all. In this world, 1 gold coin equaled 100 silver coins, and even a strong human slave was worth only about 30 silver coins. Old Luo had clearly seen that I was young and wanted to fleece me like a fat sheep. I did not haggle with him. I stood up, patted the dust off my hands, turned, and started to leave. Sure enough, old Luo panicked and hurried after me to stop me, saying repeatedly that the price was negotiable. I stopped and pointed at the 2 cow beastkin beside her. Take those 2 with her as well and give me an honest price. If it works, I'll pay. If not, I'm leaving right now. Those 2 cow beastkin eat an enormous amount, and keeping them means losing money every day. Old Luo did the math in his head at lightning speed, then immediately gritted his teeth. Fine, let's call it the price of making a friend. The lizard folk is 50 silver coins. The 2 cow beastkin are 80 silver coins, 1 gold coin and 30 silver coins in total. That really is the lowest price. I turned my head to look at Barlow, and he nodded, signaling that the price was fair. I spoke at once. Barlow, pay him. Afraid I might change my mind, old Luo quickly took the money, pulled out the key, and unlocked the iron cage. Sylvia was huddled in the innermost corner of the cage, her ice blue eyes full of fear, her whole body trembling lightly. I bent down, leaned half my body in, and grabbed her slender wrist. Her skin was icy cold to the touch. Instinctively, I circulated the pure yang power within me, and a gentle warm current flowed from my palm into her body, instantly dispelling the chill and exhaustion deep in her bones. She stared at me blankly, forgetting to struggle, and let me pull her out of the iron cage. The peddlers and mercenaries around us burst into laughter, saying I had money to burn, buying a monster to take home, and that I'd probably throw her into the woods to feed the wolves by tomorrow. I ignored the gossip, took off the wool cloak I was wearing, shook it open, and wrapped it around her frail body before bringing the 3 newly bought slaves back to the temporary camp outside the city. Our family assets were pitifully meager. 2 broken-down horse-drawn carts. For horses, the 2 guards the Baron had casually stuffed my way, old steward Barlow, cook Martha, plus the 3 slaves bought today. With so few people, going to take over the Frostfall territory overrun by the undead was little different from courting death. I handed Sylvia over to Martha and told her to take the girl to get washed up and find some fitting clothes for her to change into. I also had the guards Marcus and Gray take the 2 minotaurs, Tarn and Cole, to the horse market to buy 2 horses and pick up some barely serviceable weapons and armor while they were at it. These 2 minotaurs had D-rank strength talent, more than enough to serve as guards. After arranging all that, I went into the city with Barlow to restock supplies and inquire about prices in the north and the undead disaster. By the time we drove back to camp with cartloads of supplies at dusk, it was already getting dark. I called the 3 slaves over and assigned guard duty to the 2 minotaurs. The moment they heard they'd be fed full meals, the 2 immediately agreed in their deep, booming voices and eagerly trotted over to the guard's side. Only Sylvia remained where she was. After washing off all the grime, the little girl looked completely transformed. Her messy hair revealed its original ice blue color, hanging smoothly over her shoulders, and the scales on her face shimmered faintly in the firelight. She was wearing one of Martha's old maid outfits. It was a size too big for her, the collar hanging loose and exposing a stretch of pale collarbone. She kept her head lowered, both hands twisting the corner of her apron so hard that her fingertips had turned white with tension. I could tell she was afraid. She had probably already convinced herself why I had bought her and what was going to happen next. "Come in with me." I turned and walked toward the tent. Inside the tent, the campfire was burning brightly, its warmth driving away the chill of the north. On the table were freshly grilled steaks sizzling with fat, 2 large pieces of soft white bread, and a steaming bowl of thick vegetable soup, their aroma filling the whole tent. When Martha saw me come in, she bowed and withdrew, and in an instant only the 2 of us were left in the tent. I sat down in a chair and pointed to the stool opposite me. "Sit." She sat down gingerly on the very edge of the stool, her eyes unable to resist darting toward the roast meat on the table, her throat bobbing slightly. From the look of her, she had probably never eaten anything this good in her life. I pushed the plate of roast meat in front of her, along with the bread and thick soup. "Eat." She suddenly lifted her head, looked at the food and then at me, her eyes full of confusion and wariness, and softly said that black bread would be enough for her. I knew very well that she was afraid I was deliberately toying with her, waiting for her to reach for the food, so I could accuse her of the offense of touching the table and punish her. I found it a little amusing, tore off a piece of bread, dipped it in some gravy, and stuffed it into my mouth, teasing her casually. "This is your last meal, you know? Are you sure you won't eat?" She froze for a moment, but her gaze instead grew calm. In her view, being able to have a good meal before dying was already an act of mercy. She hesitated no longer, grabbed a piece of roast meat, and stuffed it into her mouth. The moment her teeth broke through the crisp, charred skin and the juices burst across her mouth, her eyes lit up. Rules, fear, all of it was thrown to the back of her mind. She ate in great mouthfuls, and before long she had swept the table clean, even licking the gravy off the bottom of the plate until it was spotless. When she finally put down the plate and looked up, her eyes met mine at once. It was as if she had suddenly come back to her senses. Her face went pale and trembling. She reached up to undo the button at her collar. The fabric slipped down along her shoulders, and the expanse of snow-white skin across her chest made my head spin. My nose grew hot, and I quickly reached out to pull her collar back up, both annoyed and amused. "What are you doing?" She looked at me blankly. "You gave me such a good meal. Weren't you planning to wait until I was full, then torment me for your amusement? You just said this was the last meal." Only then did I realize that she had taken my joke seriously. I let out a helpless sigh, and my tone softened. "I was teasing you. I meant the last meal of today. Get some proper rest after eating. No one is going to torment you." After saying that, I lifted the tent flap and walked out. When the night wind blew over me, the heat on my face slowly subsided. It wasn't that I was some paragon of virtue. The truth was that her body was far too weak right now. The yang energy of the pure yang sacred body was too fierce. If I really messed around now, her tiny body would probably fall apart on the spot. Over the next 10 days, we hurried north the whole way. Along the road, we ran into a few undead skeletons wandering over from the border, and although the guards could dispatch them in just a few moves, everyone's expressions grew uglier and uglier. The undead disaster at the border was even worse than expected. I knew very well that I didn't have much time left. Frostfall territory was already a complete mess, and with only the few people currently under my command, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to hold out for even a month. During these 10 days, I had Sylvia stay in my carriage the whole time. Martha had meat at every meal, and I nursed her complexion back to health quite a bit. And every day, I used the power of pure yang to nourish her meridians and guide her incomplete dragon bloodline. That warm current made her narrow her eyes in comfort every single time. I opened the system panel and checked, and her status had already changed from initial terror to happiness, while her favorability had steadily risen to 30. I knew she had always been uneasy inside. She couldn't understand why a young noble master like me didn't beat her or scold her, but instead gave her good food, a comfortable carriage to stay in, and even sent a warm current of power into her every day. She was always afraid that this was all a dream, and that when she woke up, she would be back in that stinking iron cage again. But to me, all of this was necessary preparation. She was the first candidate to be my Tao companion after I came to this world, and also the key to turning the situation around in the north. During these 10 days, I also tried cultivating the yin-yang dual cultivation art on my own, but the elemental power of this world and the spiritual energy of the cultivation world were completely different things. And the absorption efficiency was infuriatingly low. If I wanted to quickly raise my strength, dual cultivation was the only path. After one more day on the road, we would reach Frostfall City. That evening after making camp, I stood outside the tent, looking at the gray, overcast sky to the north, and made up my mind. I couldn't wait any longer. After dinner, I sent Barlow and Martha to keep watch on the perimeter. The campfire crackled inside the tent, and its warm glow made the whole tent feel cozy. I lifted the flap and walked in, looking at Sylvia standing off to the side, at a loss, and spoke evenly. "Come with me." She obediently followed me to the bedside. I sat down and looked into her ice blue eyes without beating around the bush. "Sylvia, there's something I need your help with. You should have sensed the dangers of the north these past few days as well. The undead are running rampant in Frostfall territory. With so few of us going there, we could lose our lives at any moment. I have a method that can make me stronger quickly, and it can also help awaken the dragon bloodline within you, making you stronger. But this method requires you to unite with me." She raised her head, with not the slightest trace of resistance on her face. In her understanding, she was originally my slave, and for any request from her master, she had no right to refuse. Compared to the stories the village elders told about female slaves being tortured to death by nobles, I had already treated her so well it was like an unattainable dream. Her knees bent, and she gently knelt down before me, her voice as soft as a mosquito's buzz, yet carrying a resigned meekness. "I am your slave. Everything is up to you, master." I reached out and took hold of her slender wrist. Her skin was slightly cool, with the delicate texture unique to a young girl. Sylvia's eyelashes trembled violently, and her body instinctively tensed, but she did not dodge away. Lin exerted force with his arm and pulled her into his embrace. "Don't be afraid." Lin patted her on the back, his voice very gentle. "Relax a little." Sylvia's fingers trembled slightly, but she still obediently undid the buttons of her maid outfit. In the firelight, her body was laid bare before Lin without reservation. On her pale skin, ash-gray scales spread from her waist to the outer sides of her thighs. Not only did they not ruin her beauty, they instead added a strange kind of allure. Lin's Adam's apple bobbed. The wool blanket was very soft. Sylvia lay on her back on it, her ice blue eyes full of helplessness, her eyelashes trembling badly. "Next, I will transfer power to you." Lin lowered his voice. Sylvia nodded as if she only half understood. Lin closed his eyes, and the introductory mental method of the yin-yang Hahuan art surfaced in his mind. Yin and yang converge. Qi sinks to the dantian. Seek the mysterious gate of the female principle, and connect the limbs and every part of the body. The theory was rich, but the reality was harsh. Lin tried to find that so-called mysterious gate of the female principle. Time passed second by second. Fine beads of sweat appeared on Lin's forehead. His pure yang saint body was activated, and the heat within him grew stronger and stronger. Before this, he had only been toyed with by Su Qianyue and had not accumulated any experience at all. In his previous life, he had learned a bit of knowledge from his hard drive, though, but now he discovered that it was completely different from actual practice. Those teachers misled me. Sylvia sensed Lin's agitation. She opened her eyes and looked at the sweat-drenched Lin above her. "Master." She spoke softly. "What's wrong with you?" "Can't find the way." Lin gritted his teeth and casually replied. Sylvia froze for a moment. "Can't find the way." Although she did not understand cultivation, the instinct of her frost dragon bloodline made her extremely sensitive to heat. She could clearly feel that inside Lin's body there was an enormous, extremely violent flame rampaging wildly, unable to find an outlet, and the source of that flame was pressing against the side of her leg. Sylvia's face instantly turned crimson. She recalled the things Aunt Martha had taught her over the past few days, and vaguely understood something in her heart. "Master." Sylvia's voice was as soft as a mosquito's hum. "If it's to pass that energy to me." She stretched out her slender arms and wrapped them around Lin's neck. The cool touch cleared Lin's frenzied mind a little. "I can sense where the meridians are." As she spoke, she took the initiative to move upward slightly. At the same time, the faint but pure frost aura within her, following the skin where the two of them touched, actively reached toward the violent pure yang fire inside Lin. It was like lighting a bright lamp in the darkness. Lin's originally chaotic qi instantly found an outlet for release. It was the mutual attraction of ice and fire, the natural compatibility of ultimate yin and ultimate yang. "So it's here." He no longer hesitated. Following the guidance of Sylvia's chi, he found the circulating meridian paths, and MMPH, a deeply suppressed moan spilled from Sylvia's lips. She suddenly threw back her snow-white neck, tears instantly welling at the corners of her eyes, her brows knitting together in pain. But immediately afterward, a surge of pure yang power entered her entire body along her meridians. The link was established successfully. A loud boom echoed in Lin's mind as the route map of the yin-yang dual cultivation art lit up instantly. At that moment, the chi within their bodies became completely connected, forming a perfect closed loop. The pure yang power within Lin surged wildly along this closed loop. With each circulation, that frenzied heat was neutralized a little more, transformed into pure power, and fed back into every part of his body. Amazing. This feels incredible. This was not merely the ultimate physical pleasure, but a sublimation on the level of the soul. Lin could clearly feel that his originally empty dantian was being rapidly filled by this power. Boom. A muffled sound came from within his body. Controlling this immense power, Lin began to strike at the meridians inside him. The first meridian, broken through. The second meridian, broken through. He was completely immersed in the exhilaration of his rapidly surging power. At first, Sylvia could still grit her teeth and endure it. The pure yang power had indeed dispelled the cold that had lingered in her body for years. That warm sensation made her feel as if she were soaking in warm water, even giving rise to a hint of indulgence. But as Lin intensified his assault on the meridians, more and more pure yang power poured into her body, growing increasingly violent. But the Frost Dragon bloodline within her was an S-rank top-tier talent. Although it had remained dormant due to the incompleteness of her bloodline, the pride in her bones could not be erased. Now, an external and extremely overbearing pure yang power actually wanted to turn the tables and become the master on its territory. The Frost bloodline grew furious. Buzz, those ashen white scales on Sylvia's body suddenly erupted with a dazzling, icy blue radiance. The originally docile pure yin power completely lost control at this moment. An aura of extreme cold erupted from deep within her, madly counterattacking the pure yang power flowing in. Ice and fire, ultimate yin and ultimate yang, collided violently within Sylvia's narrow meridians. Her body suddenly arched upward, taut into an exaggerated curve. The next second, her eyes rolled back and her body fell limply onto the bed, completely losing consciousness. A dazzling, icy blue radiance burst forth inside the tent. Sylvia's body floated in midair. The lights intertwined and entwined, rapidly condensing into a huge, oval cocoon of light. The chill was completely sealed inside the cocoon, and the temperature inside the tent returned to normal. Lin En did not bother putting on clothes and stood up directly from the couch, stepping closer. He reached out, his fingertips touching the surface of the cocoon. It felt hard and smooth, with none of the illusory intangibility of a phantom. System, Lin En silently called in his heart. A pale blue light screen instantly popped up. Name, Sylvia. Status, bloodline completion in progress. Lin En withdrew his hand and let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that his pure yang power had taken effect inside Sylvia's body and was reconstructing her incomplete Frost Dragon bloodline. He turned and walked back to the bed, sitting down cross-legged. Ding! Clear notification sounds rang out one after another in his mind. Dual cultivation successful. Obtained dual cultivation points. 233 obtained exclusive equipment. Frost Dragon Spear System Shop has been unlocked. A flash of blue light flickered in midair, and something strung together from a series of diamond-shaped ice crystals fell down. Lin En reached out and caught it. The item was extremely light in his hand. 12 diamond-shaped ice crystals emitted a faint blue glow, connected in the middle by a transparent, thin thread. This was clearly a lady's bracelet. Lin En stared at the item description on the light screen. Divine Artifact, Frost Dragon Spear, refined from an ice attribute dragon core, bound to Sylvia, evolves as rank increases. He casually set the bracelet beside the pillow, then turned and tapped the shop icon on the light screen. The interface unfolded, and above floated 3 large gilded characters, Spirit Treasures Pavilion, with the current assets marked below. Dual Cultivation Points 233. Spirit Treasures Pavilion has been opened. More products will be gradually unlocked as the host's cultivation improves. Lin En's fingertips slid across as he quickly browsed the product categories. Pills, talismans, magical artifacts, cultivation techniques, miscellaneous treasures. 5 categories clearly defined, with a huge span in prices. At the bottom, those cultivation techniques and high-tier magical artifacts glowing with purple and golden light were all priced from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dual cultivation points. Lin En directly skipped over the areas he could not afford, tapped into the magical artifacts category, and fixed his gaze on the very top of the list. Low-grade magical artifact, flying sword, 200 dual cultivation points. Without any hesitation, Lin En clicked exchange. The points on the light screen were instantly deducted, leaving only 33 points. Swish, a streak of silver light condensed out of thin air before his eyes. A 3-chi-long silver longsword hovered steadily in midair. Lin En reached out and grasped the hilt. It was extremely light in his hand, and the blade emitted a bone-piercing sharpness. He turned his wrist and gave a casual swing forward. Without using any power at all, the blade swept across the thick firewood placed in the corner of the tent, and the wood was silently cut into 2 pieces. The cut was smooth and clean, without even a single wood chip falling. Although it was only the lowest grade low-grade magical artifact in this world, it was already a divine weapon capable of slicing through iron like mud. Satisfied, Lin En placed the flying sword by his side and closed his eyes. When the dual cultivation had just ended, there had already been signs of a breakthrough within his body. The circulation route of the Yin-Yang Hahuan art clearly appeared in his mind. Lin En held his breath and focused, guiding the vast power in his dantian, the pure Yin power that had circulated back from Sylvia's body. After being transformed by the system, it had already become the purest source spiritual energy. This spiritual energy slowly flowed through his meridians. With each full major circulation, his meridians widened a little more. The sound of wind and snow outside the tent gradually subsided. The night grew deep. Time passed bit by bit. The faint morning light shone into the tent through the gaps. Lin En suddenly opened his eyes, a trace of golden light flashing through his pupils. A muffled boom came from within his body. The blocked meridians were completely opened, and spiritual energy surged ceaselessly through his limbs and bones. Qi refining layer 1. Lin En stood up and lowered his head to examine his body. His chest, which had originally looked thin and frail, had now become solid and broad. Clear, tight muscle lines had appeared on his abdomen. Power filled his entire body. It felt like punching a minotaur to death would be no problem at all. He brought up the system panel. Name, Lin Winster Constitution, Pure Yang Saint Body SSS Cultivation. Qi Refining Level 1 Cultivation Method, Yin-Yang Dual Cultivation Art S. Dao Companion, Sylvia Constitution Bonus, plus 20%, just then. Crack. A crisp cracking sound rang out in the quiet tent. Lin turned his head to look. A long, thin crack appeared on the surface of the cocoon of light suspended in midair. The crack spread rapidly, covering the entire cocoon in the blink of an eye. Bang! The cocoon of light exploded apart. Countless ice blue points of light drifted down in all directions. A petite figure fell from midair. Lin took a step forward and reached out, catching her steadily in his arms. The sensation in his hands made Lin pause. There were no rough, prickly scales, only the utmost smoothness and softness. Lin lowered his head to look, and the whole person froze in place. The person in his arms. Was it Sylvia? The gray-white scales had disappeared completely, replaced by smooth, fair skin that glowed with a faint pearly luster in the morning light. Her features had become even more exquisite. Her long ice-blue hair fell smoothly down, giving off a faint chill. From both sides of her forehead, a pair of dragon horns about half a palm long slanted outward. The horns were lustrous like jade, glowing with a silver-blue sheen that added a touch of exotic mystery. Her figure was even more completely different from before. Her slender waist could be encircled with one hand, yet her curves were astonishingly full. That soft weight resting on his arm made his wrist stiffen slightly from the heat. This figure, not scientific. Sylvia slowly opened her eyes. Her ice-blue eyes were crystal clear, carrying the confusion of someone who had just woken up. She tilted her head, her gaze focusing on Lin's face. Master? Her voice was soft and sweet, carrying a trace of uncertainty, along with a deep attachment she could not hide. Little Lin's head buzzed and exploded on the spot. That soft, sticky sweet, master, combined with this intensely striking visual impact. Who could possibly withstand that? Lin gave up resisting. Holding Sylvia, he turned and directly pressed her down onto the cashmere blanket. Sylvia was startled by the sudden movement. Looking at Lin above her, whose gaze burned hot, her heart pounded wildly. Her bloodline had just been completed, and this was exactly when she most needed pure yang power to help stabilize it. Sylvia did not struggle. She obediently raised her arms and wrapped them around Lin's neck. Her cool skin pressed against his burning chest, and the temperature inside the tent rose once more. More than an hour later, the temperature in the tent finally dropped a little. Lin leaned against the soft cashmere blanket, his fingers toying with that astonishing softness. He muttered inwardly. As expected of a dragon girl, she really could withstand the pure yang saint body blooming for the second time. Then, with a thought, he brought up her system panel. Name, Sylvia Race. Dragonkin rank, Tier 1 Dragon Blood Warrior Talent. Winter's Blessing S, Dragon Body S Skills. Dragonification LV1, Frost Breath LV1, Dragon Might LV1. Status: happy, infatuated, satisfied. Favorability: 60. The corners of Lin's mouth lifted. After her bloodline was completed, she had gained the Dragon Body talent, and her rank had also advanced into a first-tier warrior. Together with her awakened skills, if this build were put in a gacha game from his previous life, she'd definitely be SSR tier. He closed the panel and reached out to pull the soft, cuddly person beside him into his arms. His mind suddenly skipped a beat. Wait, did I forget something? That ice crystal bracelet, I think. It got tossed aside. Lin silently glanced at his bare body, then at the string of ice crystal beads thrown into the corner, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Well, I got so caught up in cultivation that I forgot something this important. I'm really too diligent. Lin thought silently, rolled out of bed, and picked up the bracelet from the corner. Here, this is for you. Lin returned to the bedside and handed over the bracelet. Wow, this bracelet is so pretty. Sylvia sat up at once and reached out to take it. An azure glow emerged from the bracelet, and it automatically wrapped around Sylvia's wrist. It clung firmly to her wrist, the ice crystals faintly glowing with her breathing, making her wrist look even more slender and fair. Sylvia lowered her head and stared at the bracelet on her hand, closing her eyes as if sensing something. After a short while, she opened her eyes and looked at Lin, her eyes sparkling. Thank you, master. As she spoke, Sylvia excitedly pecked Lin on the cheek. Then she shrank back like a startled little rabbit, her cheeks instantly flushing bright red. Lin smiled and touched his cheek. What exactly does this bracelet do? Sylvia replied softly. Master, this is the bracelet form of the divine artifact Frost Dragon Spear. Lin raised an eyebrow. Bracelet form? Sylvia nodded and reached out to touch the bracelet on her wrist. As long as I enter combat mode, the bracelet can transform into the Frost Dragon Spear according to my will. She hesitated for a moment, lowered her head to look at her body, and bit her lip. Does Master want to see it? I'll give you a demonstration. Of course he wanted to see it. Lin sat down by the bed, looking as if he had set out a little stool to watch the show. Sylvia slowly stood up from under the covers. Her fair skin was completely exposed to the air. Dragonification. She softly uttered those two words. White light surged out from her body, washing over her whole form like a tide. Within the white glow, her figure quietly stretched out. Her petite body, originally only 1.5 meters tall, grew to about 1.55 meters during the process of dragonification. Pale blue scales emerged from beneath her skin, layering over her body one after another. The changes in her arms were the most obvious. The lines of her muscles became tighter and more powerful, her fingers lengthened, and in the blink of an eye they turned into a pair of sharp dragon claws. Then Sylvia flicked her wrist. The ice crystal bracelet on her wrist instantly came apart. 12 ice crystals recombined in midair and lengthened. A completely ice blue spear, about 2 meters long, was gripped in her dragon claws. The spear's length was perfectly suited to her current body. Ice crystal patterns were wrapped around the grip and held in her scale-covered hand. It looked especially imposing. Lin leaned in and reached out to touch the shaft of the dragon spear. It felt piercingly cold to the touch, and its hardness was definitely far beyond ordinary steel. As expected of a divine artifact, it looked formidable at a glance. His gaze then fell on those scales, and he reached out to touch them. The scales were smooth yet tough, and his fingertips could feel the power contained beneath them. Though they didn't cover everything, all the vital areas were protected, equivalent to a natural suit of close-fitting armor. The defensive power shouldn't be bad. Lin's hand slid down along her arm. Circling around to her waist, he naturally ended up touching the long dragon tail behind her. Lin reached out and grabbed it, his fingertips lightly tracing along the pattern of the scales. Sylvia's whole body suddenly trembled, and her tail sprang out of Lin's hand as if shocked by electricity, letting out a soft cry of surprise and embarrassment. Master, There. It tickles. Lin awkwardly withdrew his hand and gave a dry cough. Ahem, I was just testing whether the tail was sturdy. He looked Sylvia up and down. The light blue scales glistened softly in the morning light, her long dragon tail swaying gently behind her, an ice blue frost dragon spear in her hand. Beautiful, truly beautiful. All right, put it away. Lin nodded in satisfaction. Sylvia dispelled her dragon form, and the scales receded like a tide, revealing the fair, tender skin beneath. The frost dragon spear in her hand also turned into a streak of blue light and became a crystal bracelet. Lin glanced at the light filtering in from outside the tent and said, "It's getting late. They're probably all getting ready to set out outside." After hearing this, Sylvia turned and picked up Lin's clothes, helping him put them on one by one. Once Lin was dressed, Sylvia picked up the maid outfit Martha had prepared for her and paused for a moment as she put it on. When she wore it before, it had hung loose on her, slack around the waist, and the hem had dragged on the ground. But now it fit perfectly. The fabric clung tightly to her tall figure, the waistline cinched just right, and it was even a little tight around the chest. The two of them lifted the tent flap one after the other and stepped out of the tent. Morning light poured down, and the camp was already bustling with noise. The guards were all packing their luggage, everyone busy preparing for today's departure. Martha was clutching a piece of cured meat in her hand and stuffing it into a chest when, out of the corner of her eye, she caught sight of the movement by the tent and froze at once. Is this Sylvia? Martha's eyes went wide, her tone full of shock. The others also gradually noticed what was happening over here, and one by one their eyes went blank with astonishment. The expressions on their faces were all exactly the same. Who is this? The butler Barlow quickly walked over, his gaze sweeping over Sylvia for 2 seconds before turning to Lin, giving a slight bow. "Young master, Miss Sylvia, this is... her bloodline has awakened," Lin said casually. Before coming out, he had already prepared his explanation. Bloodline awakening wasn't common in this world, but there were precedents, making it the perfect excuse. "I see. Congratulations, young master." Barlow knew proper etiquette and did not continue asking about the details. He turned and called for everyone to get back to work. "What are you all standing around for? Hurry up and pack your things. We're setting off." After being barked at by Barlow, everyone came back to their senses and quickly lowered their heads to continue with what they were doing. But their curiosity was already about to burst out of them, so they could only keep working while secretly sneaking glances over here. Lin paid no attention to the inquisitive looks around him and walked straight to the carriage. He stepped onto it using the footboard, then turned and extended his hand towards Sylvia, who was still standing where she was. "Let's go," Lin said calmly. "It's time to set out." The carriage jolted along the dirt road for an entire day. The sky was dim, and the lead gray clouds hung very low. "Young master, up ahead is Frostfall Town." Barlow's voice came through the curtain. Lin lifted the carriage curtain. A cold wind rushed straight into his face, carrying the damp scent of rotting leaves. At the end of his line of sight, a cluster of low wooden houses crouched in the snow. Around them was a crooked ring of wooden fencing. "This is called a town? It's barely even a village." Suddenly, Lin frowned. Faint cries and shouts drifted over on the wind. "Speed up." The whip cracked, and the carriage accelerated up the hilltop. Lin saw the situation clearly. Race: undead skeleton rank. 0. More than a dozen pale white skeletons were frantically hacking at the town gate. Rusted iron swords struck the wooden gate, sending wood chips flying. Through the gate, a few townsfolk holding pitchforks could vaguely be seen, desperately bracing it shut, their faces full of despair. Crack! The fragile wooden gate finally could not hold and shattered with a crash. 2 skeletons stepped over the broken planks and lunged inside, the rusty swords in their hands slashing straight at the young townsman in front. The townsman was so frightened that he fell to the ground and scrambled backward in panic. At the instant the rusty sword fell, a streak of golden light shot down from the hilltop. Without waiting for the carriage to stop, Lin leaped straight out of the carriage. Clang! The low-grade magical artifact flying sword left its sheath. Lin gripped the hilt, pouring the power of pure yang within his body into the blade without reserve. Leaping over the shattered wooden gate, he brought his sword down on the skull of the foremost skeleton. There was no clang of metal striking metal. The blade smoothly split the hard bone apart. Hiss! The skeleton did not even have time to struggle before the ghostly blue soul fire in its eye sockets was extinguished on the spot. Its entire frame seemed to be burned by blazing fire, and in the blink of an eye it turned into a pile of white ash. One gust of wind scattered it completely. The townsmen sitting on the ground gaped, staring blankly at the figure standing in front of him. The remaining undead felt no fear and were unmoved by their companion being reduced to ashes. Their hollow eye sockets locked onto Lin in unison as they raised their weapons and charged at him. Courting death, Lin let out a cold snort and flicked his wrist. His foot slid aside, avoiding the rusty battle axe chopping down from the left, and with a backhand slash he severed that skeleton's spine. The power of pure yang invaded along the cut, and the second skeleton turned to ash. Then came the third and the fourth. Sword light flashed, and golden spiritual energy traced dazzling arcs through the dim dusk. In less than half a minute, more than a dozen undead were reduced to ash on the ground, without even a single intact bone left behind. Lin sheathed his sword and steadied his breathing. The power of pure yang was indeed overbearing, but the spiritual energy reserves of the first level of qi refining were still too little. After that burst, 1/3 of his dantian was emptied. Only then did the carriage arrive outside the gate. Barlow stood there with his mouth hanging open for a long while. The two Minotaur guards stared wide-eyed at the white ash on the ground. "Master." Sylvia jumped down from the carriage and quickly walked to Lin's side. Her ice-blue eyes were full of self-reproach, and her dragon horns drooped slightly. "I'm sorry. I didn't react in time just now and failed to protect you." She was now a first-tier dragonblood warrior. She should have been the one charging into battle. Lin raised a hand and ruffled her hair, casually giving one of her dragon horns a pat as well. "It's fine. Just a few small fry, not enough to require you to step in." At that moment, the townsfolk inside the gate who had narrowly escaped disaster finally came to their senses. More than a dozen people all rushed over at once and dropped to their knees with thuds all around. "Thank you, my lord, for saving our lives. Praise the gods, praise your generosity." Lin waved a hand. "All of you get up." The townsfolk rose shakily to their feet, secretly sizing up this young noble. "I am Lin Winced." Lin's gaze swept across the crowd. "The newly appointed lord of Frostfall territory. I have come to take over this land." The moment the words left his mouth, the gratitude and joy on the townsfolk's faces visibly faded. Several people even instinctively took half a step back. Lin took in all of these reactions. It seemed the reputation the previous lords had left here really was terrible. A gray-haired old man in a linen robe covered in patches squeezed out from behind the crowd. Leaning on a wooden cane, he walked up to Lin and gave a deep bow. "Honorable Lord, I am Aubrey, the mayor of Frostfall Town." The old man's voice was hoarse and carried deep exhaustion. "Welcome to the Frostfall territory. Please allow me to lead you to the Lord's manor." Seeing this, the other townspeople lowered their heads and scattered, each returning to their dilapidated wooden huts, even bolting their doors shut tight. Lin paid no mind to their attitude. He turned to look at Barlow. "Barlow, take Marcus and the others to the Lord's manor, unload the thing, and get settled in." "Yes, young master." Barlow hurriedly directed the Minotaurs to drive the carts. "Mayor, let's take a walk." Lin pointed toward the inside of the town. Aubrey nodded and led the way ahead with his cane. The two of them walked slowly along the muddy village road. "What's the situation in the town now?" Lin got straight to the point. Aubrey sighed. "My lord, the situation is very bad. There are only 213 people left in the entire town now. Most were either killed by the undead or fled south." Aubrey then pointed to a small patch of open ground on the west side of the town. "The undead often wander around the town, and we simply don't dare go far. We could only reclaim a small plot by the fence and plant some cold-resistant rye. But the yield is far too low, nowhere near enough to eat." Lin nodded lightly, understanding the situation now. The undead were the biggest problem. If this issue couldn't be resolved, the town wouldn't be able to farm in peace or develop properly. Even reducing taxes would only provide temporary relief. It wouldn't improve things at the root. He looked up and said to Aubrey, "Tomorrow morning, have everyone in town gather in the central square." Aubrey froze for a moment, then quickly asked, "My lord, what is this for?" "I have something to say to everyone." Aubrey stared at Lin, then finally nodded. "I will make sure every single person is notified." As they talked, the two arrived at the west side of the town. A two-story gray stone house stood on the open ground, with two single-story small stone houses attached beside it. Though old and worn, it was at least built of stone, much better than the drafty wooden huts in town. "My lord, this is the Lord's manor." Aubrey stopped walking. "Please rest first. If you need anything, call for me at any time. Thank you for your hard work. You may go." Lin pushed open the heavy oak door. Barlow was directing Marcus and Gray in moving supplies. The first floor was a spacious hall, furnished with a long wooden table and several chairs. A fire had already been lit in the fireplace, driving away the chill inside the house. Martha was in the small kitchen nearby, lighting a fire to boil water. Lin walked to the fireplace and collapsed into a wooden chair padded with old animal hide. He rubbed his throbbing temples. Before transmigrating, he had been an overworked engineer, a corporate workhorse constantly doing overtime and fed empty promises by his supervisor. Now he had become a lord, had to deal with this group of people, and also had to manage the survival of the more than 200 people in Frostfall Town. His brain cells were practically burning out. It was even more exhausting than working 3 jobs before. He leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes, and took a moment to collect himself, then called toward the stairs, "Sylvia." The little maid poked her head out from a bedroom on the 2nd floor. She was still holding a rag, her ice blue hair tied behind her head with a cloth strip, and there was a streak of soot on her face, making her look a little comical. "Master, please wait a moment, I'll be done cleaning soon," she shouted back. "No rush, take your time." A faint smile appeared at the corner of Lin's mouth. At least there was still Sylvia at home, pleasing to the eye. For now, that was the only thing that brought him any comfort. He closed his eyes and began rapidly sorting out his current situation in his mind. Population, food, safety. Every single issue was a dead knot stuck around his neck. Tap, tap, tap. Light footsteps came from the wooden staircase. Lin opened his eyes. Sylvia walked down the stairs. The dust on her face had already been washed clean, and her fair skin was tinged with a faint blush in the firelight. Her long hair draped smoothly over her shoulders, and the pair of silver-blue dragon horns atop her head were small and delicate. This old maid outfit Martha found for her was indeed a bit tight. The fabric across her chest was stretched taut, rising and falling slightly with her breathing. The apron strings cinched her slender waist into an exaggerated curve. "Master, the rooms on the 2nd floor have been cleaned." Sylvia walked up to Lin. Lin nodded, just about to speak, but Sylvia took half a step closer. She bit her lower lip, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her apron, her cheeks so red they looked ready to drip blood. Aunt Martha had taught her that when the master was tired, a slave should know how to help ease the master's burdens. She took a deep breath and summoned the courage to raise her head. "Master, you've been traveling all day. You must be tired. Would you like to eat first or bathe first or?" By the time she said the last 3 words, her head was nearly buried in her chest. Lin froze. Why did that line sound so familiar? Looking at Sylvia's shy and nervous expression, the irritation in Lin's heart was swept away at once. He stood up, a mischievous smile curling at the corner of his lips. "Since you've already asked like that." Lin stepped forward and directly wrapped an arm around her slender waist. With a slight exertion of force, he lifted her whole body into a bridal carry. "Ah!" Sylvia was startled and instinctively threw her arms around Lin's neck. "Of course I'll choose, or." Carrying her, Lin strode toward the bedroom. Early the next morning, the earthen square at the center of Frostfall Town was packed with people. Mayor Aubrey had gone door to door knocking last night, gathering everyone in town. Everyone was on edge, afraid that this newly arrived lord was going to torment them again. Lin walked along the muddy road and stepped onto the platform at the very front of the square. He swept his gaze over the townspeople below, sallow and emaciated, their eyes evasive. This was all 200-odd people of Frostfall Town. Looking at them, Lin said calmly, "I am Lin Winced. Starting today, I am the new lord of Frostfall territory. I called everyone here today to announce several new laws." The moment the townspeople below heard the word laws, their hearts immediately sank. Every time the previous lords announced laws, it was either some new way to raise taxes or forced labor requisition. They were already so poor they were close to gnawing on tree bark. If taxes went up again, it really would drive the whole town to death. A few timid women had even begun to redden their eyes, secretly wiping away tears. Lin raised one finger and dropped a bombshell right away. "First, starting today, all agricultural and commercial taxes in the territory will be changed. It used to be 80%. From now on, everything is reduced to 20%. The moment these words came out, the square fell into deathly silence. Everyone's eyes widened and their mouths hung open, wondering if their ears had frozen wrong. 20%? In the entire empire, no one had ever heard of taxes lower than 60%, let alone 20%. Several seconds passed before a buzzing wave of discussion erupted from the crowd. "My god of light, did Lord Sir just say 20%? Could we have heard wrong? Maybe what he actually meant was raising it to 100%. Aubrey walked forward leaning on his cane, so excited that even his graying beard was trembling violently. "My lord, did you just say 20%? Is that really true?" Lin looked at the old mayor and nodded with certainty. That's right, 20%. It will be posted in black and white at the gate of the Lord's manor right away. The crowd below completely erupted, breaking into irrepressible cries and laughter. Wise indeed, my lord. No one knew who shouted first, but then everyone in the square started yelling at the top of their lungs. Praise be to Lord Lin. Their voices were full of excitement and disbelief. A few old men even dropped to their knees on the cold, muddy ground and kowtowed on the spot. Lin raised both hands and pressed them downward, signaling everyone to be quiet. When the murmur died down a little, he raised a second finger. Second, I am going to form a territorial guard, specifically responsible for clearing out the undead outside. Anyone selected will be paid 5 silver coins a month, and meals 3 times a day will also be provided. The moment these words came out, the crowd below became even more worked up than before. My god of light, 5 silver coins a month. Let alone in Frostfall Town, even recruiting in a bigger city would have people fighting to join under those terms. If someone could earn that kind of money, the whole family could eat soft black bread. The townspeople whispered among themselves below, every face full of struggle and hesitation. Lin took in their reactions without concern. The terror of the undead had bin rooted too deeply in this land, and it was only natural for ordinary people to be afraid. He had never expected this bunch to turn into a suicide squad right away. They needed some time to adjust. Lin raised a third finger, his tone softening a little. Third, the territory needs construction. Farming, repairing walls, reclaiming wasteland, clearing ruins. As long as you work for me, I'll pay you. The moment these words were spoken, the eyes of those gaunt old men and women below lit up instantly. Their bodies weren't fit for risking their lives fighting the undead, but farm work and wall repair. Those strength jobs, they could do them. That crooked ring of wooden fencing around the outskirts of the town had long needed repair, and those abandoned wheat fields also needed people to turn the soil. As long as they were willing to put in the labor, they could exchange it for food to get through the winter. It was practically a blessing falling from the sky. Looking at the hope rekindled in their eyes, Lin continued. If you want to earn money, come to the gate of the Lord's manor every morning from now on to get work. Work a day, get paid a day. I absolutely won't make you labor for nothing, and I absolutely won't withhold a single coin. A warm cheer erupted from the crowd, and now even those half-grown children were jumping excitedly. The way everyone looked at this young lord had already changed from initial fear to complete gratitude. All right. Lin clapped his hands, cutting off everyone's discussion. Registration starts now. Anyone who wants to join the guard, come over to the open space on the right. The square fell quiet, and everyone looked at one another, with no one daring to take the first step. Lin did not urge them, simply standing there and waiting quietly. After a while, a man in a worn leather coat gritted his teeth and strode out from the crowd. Splashing through the mud, he walked to the open space on the right and thumped his chest hard with one hand. My lord, my name is Drake. I want to sign up for the guard. Lin glanced at him and silently willed the system panel to open. A pale blue light screen instantly popped up before his eyes. Drake Wood, Hunter, Rank 0, has actual combat experience with the undead, courage acceptable. Lin nodded in satisfaction and turned to look at the steward beside him. Barlow, write down his name. With Drake taking the lead, a few more young men in the crowd gritted their teeth and stepped forward. My lord, count me in. I'm strong. Me too, I'm fast. A few more people stepped forward one after another. Lin counted them, 8 young and middle-aged men in total. Though these men were thin and weak, their palms were covered in calluses. At a glance, it was obvious they were used to hard labor. Although there weren't many, they were barely enough as the first batch of core members. Lin pulled out 8 silver coins from his pocket and stuffed them one by one into the hands of the 8 men. An advance payment. 1 coin per person. The rest will be paid in full at the end of the month. The 8 men held the silver coins, so excited that their hands were trembling, and bowed repeatedly in thanks. Just then, 2 scrawny men in the crowd rolled their eyes, exchanged a look, and also jogged over to the open space on the right with a showy air. Sir, we're signing up too. We can fight the undead as well. Barlow stood to the side and immediately recognized the 2 fellows as notorious loafers in town. They usually idled around doing nothing, and now that they saw money being handed out, it was obvious they wanted to come freeload. Barlow stepped forward, fixed them with a stern look, and said, The guard is a place where people risk their lives fighting the undead, not a place to feed idlers. If you take the young master's money and don't work, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Barlow paused, and his tone turned extremely severe. If you take the Lord's silver and don't work, then under imperial law it counts as theft, and you'll be reduced to slaves. The two scrawny men shuddered in fright as soon as they heard they could be turned into slaves, and quickly withdrew the hands they had just stretched out. The two of them smiled awkwardly and slunk back into the crowd, not daring to stick their heads out again. Looking at the completed roster, Lin waved to the townspeople in the square. "All right, that's all for today. Everyone, disperse and get back to whatever you should be doing." The townspeople scattered with endless thanks, and every step they took was much lighter than when they had arrived. Lin turned around and looked at the 8 guard members standing in a row. Sylvia stood quietly at his side, a trace of anticipation showing in her ice-blue eyes. Lin looked at the sky, and his tone grew serious. "You lot, go tidy up the backyard of the Lord's residence now. Training starts in a moment. The undead won't give you time to rest." Drake and the other 7 young men followed Marcus and quickly arrived at the storeroom entrance in the backyard of the Lord's residence. Besides the 8 human young men, there were also the 2 minotaurs, Ton and Cole, making a group of 10. He strode to the corner, lifted several old wooden crates, and dug out stacks of half-worn hardened leather armor from inside. "Come over and pick one that fits, then put it on. Don't dawdle." Marcus pointed at the leather armor on the ground and loudly called out to these new recruits. The 8 men all rushed forward at once, each rummaging through the crates for leather armor in the right size. Ton and Cole were too large, and ordinary leather armor simply wouldn't fit over them. In the end, they only found 2 widened old suits that they could barely squeeze into. After putting on the leather armor, this group of townspeople really did look somewhat like guards. Each of them straightened his back and sized the others up. Lin entered with Sylvia, his gaze sweeping over the newly equipped recruits, and nodded in satisfaction. "Ton, Cole, you two are strong and thick-skinned. Take a tower shield each and be responsible for standing at the very front and tanking damage." The 2 minotaurs responded in deep, muffled voices, and each went over to pick up a heavy half-body tower shield. Lin then pointed at Drake and Amon, the 2 men who were still fairly sturdy. "You two, take a 2-handed warhammer each and follow behind Ton and the others, responsible for dealing damage." The 2 hurried over and picked out 2 handy 2-handed warhammers, gripping them and giving them a couple of forceful swings. "As for the rest of you," Lin looked at the other 6 men. "Each of you take a small round shield and a 1-handed spiked mace. Your task is to flank from the sides, look for the right moment to finish off those skeletons, and absolutely not let them get back up again." The 6 men followed suit, quickly picking out their weapons from the pile and standing in a neat row fully equipped. Lin finally looked at the guards Marcus and Gray, who were standing off to the side. "Marcus, Gray, you two take long swords and round shields, and keep a close eye on the battle from the side. If anything unexpected happens, you must step in immediately and ensure their safety." The 2 men immediately straightened their backs, thumped their chests with one hand, and loudly acknowledged the order. With all the equipment distributed, Lin began teaching them the most basic formation drills. Attention, at ease, march. These commands were completely unheard of to the people of this world. Even the most basic commands like left turn and right turn ended with them stiffly turning into each other and colliding face to face. Lin patiently corrected their movements again and again, teaching them how to act in unison by listening to commands and how to maintain formation while advancing. Although they were only the most basic movements, this kind of orderly, uniform training method quickly gave this group of slack townsfolk a faint semblance of soldiers. Drake and the others trained until they were drenched in sweat, and their awe for this young lord grew even deeper. In all their lives, they had never seen such an unfathomably sophisticated training method, and the Lord's image in their hearts instantly rose to an even greater height. Seeing that the training was getting on track, and that everyone could barely march and step now, Lin finally handed the job of supervision over to Marcus. He himself took Sylvia and turned back to the study on the 2nd floor. Frostfall Town was now awaiting restoration in every respect, and there were simply countless matters to deal with. Sitting behind his desk, Lin kept writing and sketching nonstop with a quill pen in hand. Before he knew it, it was already afternoon. The wooden door to the study was gently knocked, and Sylvia walked in softly carrying a tray. On the tray was a steaming cup of black tea, along with 2 butter cookies. The aroma of the black tea mixed with the rich sweetness of butter instantly filled the entire study, making even tense nerves relax a little involuntarily. "Master, you've been busy for most of the day. Have some tea and take a break." Sylvia gently set the tray down on a corner of the desk. Lin put down the quill and rubbed his sore brow. Working bent over the desk for so long had left his neck and shoulders somewhat stiff, and he leaned back in his chair and stretched hard. Looking at the well-behaved Sylvia standing by the desk, A trace of mischievous amusement suddenly rose in Lin's heart. He suddenly reached out, grabbed Sylvia by the wrist, and with a slight pull drew her whole body into his arms. Sylvia let out a cry of surprise and fell sitting onto Lin's lap. Her ice-blue eyes filled with panic. "Master, it's still daytime." Blushing, she spoke in a voice as soft as a mosquito's buzz, her hands nervously twisting together. Lin leaned close to her ear, his tone teasing. "Daytime or nighttime, what of it? I never said I was going to do anything. Just what exactly is going on in that little head of yours?" Sylvia was left speechless by the question, and even her fair neck was tinged pink. I wasn't." She stammered for a long while, without managing a complete sentence. Lin let out a low chuckle and directly lifted her onto the broad desk. "But then, you guessed right." Sylvia was so startled that she quickly braced both hands on the desktop, trying to slide back down. "Master, this is a desk. We can't do it here." She waved her hands repeatedly in panic, her gaze darting everywhere. Lin braced both hands on the edge of the desk, giving her no chance to escape. "What's wrong with a desk? Is a desk somehow more noble than a bed?" He raised an eyebrow and stared at her with a half-smile. Sylvia quickly shook her head and hurriedly tried to explain. "I didn't mean that. I just thought this is where you handle important matters, and it wouldn't be good to dirty it." "There you go, then." Lin casually pushed aside the parchment on the desk that was covered in plans. "Today I'll be a tutoring teacher and give you a proper lesson right here. You need to learn more useful knowledge so you can help your master me better in the future. After all, the future of Frostfall Town will depend on us building it together." Hearing that she could help her master, the panic in Sylvia's eyes disappeared. In its place was a bright gleam. She nodded vigorously, her expression turning extremely serious and resolute. "Please teach me, master. I'll definitely work hard and seriously study the knowledge you teach me." Seeing her so obedient and eager to learn, little Lin's desire flared up with a whoosh. He stopped wasting words and directly reached out to grab the temporary tablecloth, yanking it hard. "Then let's begin the lesson now." Lin undid the buttons of that slightly tight maid outfit. The temperature in the study rose rapidly, and the sounds of training outside the window were completely shut off from this little world. More than an hour later, a strange, faint fragrance filled the study, and even the air seemed to grow somewhat thick. Sylvia lay sprawled across the desktop like a puddle of soft mud, her ice-blue long hair scattered in disarray, covering half of her small face. She gasped for breath, and a fine layer of sweat beaded on her fair skin. Even her pair of crystal-clear dragon horns carried a faint pink sheen. "Master, I really can't learn anymore," she muttered weakly, not even having the strength to lift a finger, her whole body limp and boneless. Lin unhurriedly straightened his clothes. Looking at the pitifully delicate figure on the desk, the corners of his mouth curved into a satisfied smile. "Master, you're amazing. You know so much." Sylvia turned her head to look at Lin, her eyes full of infatuation and deep admiration. Lin reached out and pinched her soft cheek, letting out a light laugh, his tone carrying a hint of teasing. "I'll let you off this time. Your learning progress is still a bit too slow, so you need more practice. Next time I'll teach you some other new knowledge, so you'd better be prepared in advance." Sylvia obediently nuzzled his palm, her voice light and soft, carrying the particular languor and dependence that came after. "Thank you for your teaching, master. I will continue to study hard." Early the next morning, the morning mist over Frostfall Town had not yet fully cleared. Lin pushed open the doors of the Lord's Manor, and a blast of cold air hit him in the face. The 10 members of the Territorial Guard had already assembled in the courtyard. Everyone was wearing the old leather armor that had just been issued last night, each holding a weapon, their eyes gleaming with excitement. Lin swept his gaze over the crowd and directly led the team toward the outskirts of town. The atmosphere in the group instantly grew tense. Sylvia stayed close by Lin's side, using her dragon bloodline to sense the surroundings. They had not gone far when she suddenly stopped and pointed toward a withered grove to the front right. "Master, there's movement over there, less than 50 meters away." Following her gaze, Lin saw 2 ghastly pale skeletons wandering among the dead trees, ghostly blue soul fire glowing through the gaps in their bones. At the sight of the real thing, the recruits' hands trembled as they gripped their weapons. The 2 Minotaur beastmen had no idea what fear was. They let out excited snorts, 2 streams of white vapor puffing from their nostrils. Lin didn't even need to give an order. The 2 had already raised the half-body tower shields in their hands and charged out. The 2 skeletons had just turned their heads when, bang, a dull impact rang out. The tremendous force sent them flying 2 meters away, their bones scattering all over the ground. Drake and Amon stood there dumbfounded, mouths hanging open as they watched the scene. "What the hell are you all standing there for?" Marcus stood to the side, cursing furiously. "Get up there and smash them with your hammers. Are you waiting for them to get back up and chop you down?" Drake snapped back to his senses, raised his two-handed warhammer, and charged forward. Amon and the others followed close behind. The two skeletons had just pieced their scattered arm bones back together and hadn't even had time to stand up yet. "Die!" Drake shut his eyes and swung his warhammer down with all his might. Crack! The skeleton's skull was struck by the warhammer and caved in on the spot. The ghostly blue soul fire flickered twice, then went out completely. Amon and the others also brought their hammers down wildly, smashing the other skeleton to powder. Drake panted heavily and opened his eyes to stare at the bones on the ground, hardly believing what he was seeing. "We won just like that? Not bad." Lin stepped forward. "The undead aren't that scary. Once you smash them apart, they're just a pile of broken bones." The guard members looked at one another. Much of the fear on their faces faded, replaced by an indescribable excitement. "Keep moving. Clear the perimeter." Lin waved his hand. Over the next 2 hours, the team advanced around the outskirts of Frostfall Town. Sylvia's perception was extremely precise, giving advance warning every time. They encountered several waves of undead along the way, sometimes 5 or 6, sometimes only 1 or 2. With the experience from the first fight, the guards' coordination became more and more practiced. Ton and Cole held the front line and took the brunt of the charges, while Marcus and Gray covered the flanks. Drake and the others seized opportunities to move in and finish them off. After clearing more than 20 skeletons in a row, no one in the team was injured. Morale soared to an unprecedented high. The team pushed forward to the south side of the town. This had once been the largest stretch of farmland in Frostfall territory, but now it was overgrown with withered grass as tall as a person's waist. A figure stood in the middle of the wasteland. Lin halted. That wasn't an ordinary skeleton. Its bones had a dull metallic sheen. Lin silently opened the panel. Race: Undead skeleton rank. Tier 1 warrior skills. Swordsmanship E. Magic power F notes. It had been a low-ranking soldier in life. After death, it was corroded by undead energy and evolved into a Tier 1 skeleton. Compared to ordinary skeletons, it has basic combat skills and greater strength. Lin frowned. Tier 1. Be careful, everyone. The atmosphere in the team instantly froze. The confidence Drake had just built up was shattered by those 2 words. Tier 1. Cold sweat broke out again on the hand gripping his warhammer. Ton and Cole, however, didn't care about any of that. Roaring angrily, the 2 raised their tower shields and charged. The soul fire in the skeleton's eye sockets suddenly flared. It turned around and quickly raised its wooden shield into a defensive stance. Bang! Ton's tower shield slammed heavily into the skeleton's shield. The skeleton's feet dug into the mud as it slid back 2 steps, barely managing to withstand the charge. Cole charged in right after him, but the skeleton sidestepped and casually brought up the iron sword in its hand. Using his force against him, it knocked Cole's shield off to the side in one move. Behind them, Drake's eyes went wide. Gritting his teeth, he raised his warhammer and charged forward. The skeleton's hollow eye sockets turned toward Drake. Its left arm suddenly exerted force, and with a shove of its wooden shield, it directly knocked Tarn back a step. Then its waist twisted, and the iron sword in its right hand swept out with a sharp whistling sound. Drake had no time to react. Watching the blade sweeping toward his neck, he instinctively tried to step back. But his heel landed on a raised clump of dirt. Losing his balance, Drake fell straight backward, just as the iron sword was about to slash into Drake's body. Marcus reacted. Clang. The 2 swords collided. Marcus's expression changed drastically. A tremendous force traveled along the blade. He was sent flying backward by the strike and slammed heavily onto Drake, who had only halfway gotten back up. The 2 of them rolled into a heap, covered in mud and water. Lin stared at the scene, his eyes nearly popping out, and couldn't help blurting out a curse. Holy shit, is a Tier 1 skeleton monster really this strong? Although Tarn and Kor were only Tier 0, their strength and build were no joke. The 2 of them charging together still couldn't suppress this skeleton. If this were in the game from his previous life, it'd at least be an elite monster, right? Lin gripped the hilt of his sword, just about to step in personally. Master, let me do it. Sylvia suddenly stepped forward and stopped Lin. I want to help bear some of your burden. I can't always hide behind you. Lin glanced at her, feeling the intense fighting spirit radiating from her, and nodded lightly. Be careful. Don't push yourself. Sylvia nodded, her lips moving slightly. Dragon transformation. Dazzling white light instantly surged out from her body, enveloping her whole being. When the white light dissipated, Sylvia's form had already fully unfolded. Layers of pale blue scales covered her body. Her legs suddenly exerted force, and she shot toward the skeleton like a blue shadow. The soul fire in the skeleton's eye sockets flared wildly, and it immediately raised its iron sword to defend itself. Sylvia paid no attention to technique at all. Her right hand transformed into a sharp dragon claw and went straight for the skeleton's head. The skeleton reacted extremely quickly, gripping its sword with both hands and raising it to block. The dragon claw raked hard across the iron sword, producing a harsh scraping sound. At the same time, an extremely cold frost aura spread from the dragon claw onto the iron sword. In the blink of an eye, the rust-covered blade was coated in a thick layer of white frost. Even the skeleton's arms stiffened along with it, and its movements visibly slowed by half a beat. Sylvia seized the opportunity, suddenly spun around, and the thick dragon tail behind her swept across. Bang! It struck the skeleton squarely in the breastbone, directly sending it flying. While the skeleton was still in midair, Sylvia bent her legs and kicked off the ground, leaping high. She opened her mouth, and icy blue freezing air poured out. Frost breath. The extremely low temperature instantly enveloped the skeleton in midair. The skeleton didn't even have a chance to struggle before it was frozen directly into a gleaming ice sculpture, which then crashed heavily to the ground. Sylvia fell from midair, her right fist clenched tight as power madly gathered within her body. Borrowing the momentum of her descent, she smashed her fist viciously into the head of the skeleton that had been frozen into an ice sculpture. Crash! Cracks instantly spread all over the ice sculpture, and in the next second it exploded completely. The Tier 1 skeleton was smashed directly into a pile of ice shards. The surrounding guard members were all dumbfounded. The two old guards, Marcus and Gray, were even more shocked, their scalps tingling. They had always thought this foreign girl was nothing more than the personal maid the Lord had bought with money. Small and delicate-looking, quiet and gentle. Who could have imagined that when this dainty little maid fought, she would be even more terrifying than a crazed orc? Marcus swallowed hard and stiffly turned his neck toward Gray, lowering his voice as he spoke. Gray, the two of us, we haven't offended her before, have we? Gray thought back carefully and shook his head somewhat uncertainly. Probably not. We usually haven't even spoken more than a few words to her. Marcus let out a long breath and raised a hand to wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. That's good, that's good. From now on, we must be extra polite to this little maid and absolutely must not do anything to upset her in the slightest. The pale blue scales on Sylvia's body quickly receded. The two guards exchanged a glance, both making up their minds at the same time. Her sharp dragon claws turned back into fair, slender fingers. She turned around, and the cold, ruthless killing intent that had seemed to freeze everything just now vanished without a trace. Stepping on the ice shards all over the ground, she skipped over to Lin. Her ice blue eyes were full of anticipation. Master, was I amazing? She tilted her head up, her dragon horns gleaming silver blue in the sunset. Lin raised a hand and rubbed her smooth long hair. Well done. Without you, these few guys would probably have died here today. Sylvia's cheeks flushed pink. She lowered her head, twisting the hem of her clothes with both hands, her voice tiny. As long as Master is satisfied. Marcus and Gray beside them exchanged a look and swallowed at the same time. With such a delicate appearance, who would dare connect her with the monster that had just torn apart a skeleton with her bare hands? Lin paid no attention to the guard's shock. He stepped over to the pile of shattered ice shards and crouched down. The bones had been shattered very thoroughly. Lin rummaged through the ice shards a couple of times. A dark gray crystal came into view. The crystal was only about the size of a thumbnail, and gray-black mist faintly drifted inside it. Lin picked it up. A pale blue system panel popped up. Item. Tier 1 Undead Magic Core Use. Can be used as a base material for magic potions. Magic potions. The fastest and safest way for ordinary people to break through the 0 tier. But even the most basic tier, one potion costs 1 gold coin, enough to feed an ordinary farming household for a whole year. A poor place like Frostfall Town can't even afford to support a single transcendent. This was why transcendents were so rare. Resources were monopolized by the top great nobles. Lin put the magic core into his pocket and stood up. The sunset on the horizon had already completely sunk below it. The temperature began to drop sharply. The cold wind swept up the withered grass on the ground, making a rustling sound. It was getting dark. Lin swept his gaze over the surroundings. The undead would be more active at night, so today's expedition would end here. He looked at the still-dazed guard members. Form up, return to town. Drake and the others hurriedly picked up the weapons they had dropped on the ground and clumsily formed ranks. The team turned around and headed toward Frostfall Town. Lin walked at the very front, with Sylvia following closely at his side. Was today's expenditure significant? Lin asked, turning his head. It's fine. Sylvia felt the power inside her. A battle of that level just now. Even if it happened 10 more times, she still wouldn't be tired. She paused, then looked up at Lin's profile. As long as I can help Master, I'm not afraid of anything. Lin said nothing. As the cold wind blew past, Sylvia instinctively moved a little closer to him.